The war had turned against Germany, and across the Atlantic, in the wide, sun-baked heart of Texas, the United States was preparing for prisoners it never expected to hold in such numbers. Freight trains rolled into dusty stations carrying weary German soldiers, men who had once marched through Paris and Warsaw, now staring through boxcar slats at a land so vast it seemed unreal. They expected punishment, starvation, revenge. They expected to be treated as monsters. What awaited them instead was order, efficiency, and the bewildering calm of a people who did not seem to hate them. When the train doors slid open at Camp Bowie, near Brownwood, Texas, the heat hit them first. It was a dry, pulsing warmth that carried the scent of mesquite and diesel. Beyond the platform stretched rows of white wooden barracks, neat as chess pieces, each window trimmed in army green. Barbed wire glinted in the sunlight, but behind it were not bayonets or snarling guards, just American soldiers in pressed khaki, sipping coffee from tin mugs. Some smiled, curious, as the Germans shuffled down the ramps in silence, their boots crunching on red dust. To the prisoners, it felt like walking onto another planet. The first impression was confusion. These were not the victors of propaganda posters. No swagger, no cruelty, no sense of vengeance. One sergeant, barely 20, called out in broken German, "Welcome, fellows. You will get food and showers soon." A few POWs laughed bitterly, thinking it mockery. But then came the bowls of beef stew, the slices of white bread, and cups of hot coffee served from steaming urns. It wasn't a trick. The Americans fed them before questioning them. For men who had eaten moldy bread in the field, it felt both merciful and humiliating. The camp itself ran like a small city. Electric lights glowed in the evenings. The showers ran hot. There were medical inspections, dental checks, even lectures on camp rules delivered through translators who spoke impeccable German. "You are soldiers, not criminals," one interpreter said. "Behave with discipline, and you will be treated with respect." That sentence echoed in their minds. Respect for prisoners? It contradicted everything they had been told about the Americans, the supposed barbarians who dropped fire on Hamburg and Dresden. Some of the men still wore Afrika Korps insignia, their uniforms sun-faded from the desert. Others had fought in Italy or Normandy, their eyes hollowed by months of retreat. One officer, Oberleutnant Becker, wrote later in his diary, "They do not shout at us. They do not strike us. They even apologize when counting us. Perhaps they wish to shame us with kindness." To a man trained in obedience and fear, that kind of civility was disarming. The enemy was behaving as if the war were already over. Days passed in strange routine. Work details filled the mornings, clearing brush, repairing fences, helping local farmers pick cotton or mend barns. The guards were watchful but relaxed. They spoke of baseball, of girls, of home. They let the prisoners read German-language newspapers and even form orchestras. It was civilization behind wire, and the men didn't know whether to feel grateful or mocked. One night, Becker overheard two Americans arguing about baseball scores and laughed quietly to himself. The sound startled him. It had been months since he'd heard laughter that wasn't forced. Yet beneath the civility was an unease, something the Germans couldn't quite name. It came at night when the camp grew quiet. Beyond the outer fences, in the rolling darkness, came the low, heavy sound of breathing, then a muffled growl. A sound too measured to be wild, too close to be distant. Men turned in their bunks, listening. "Hund," someone whispered. "Dogs." The rumor spread through the barracks by morning. The Americans had dogs guarding the perimeter. Not just any dogs, massive ones, disciplined, unseen. The prisoners peered through cracks in the fence during roll call, scanning for movement. They saw only shadows and the occasional gleam of eyes in the grass. Then, one afternoon, as the sun burned low, they caught their first real glimpse. A patrol walked by, 2 American MPs and, beside them, 2 enormous black and tan dogs. Muscles rippled under sleek coat. The animals moved without barking, every step matched to their handlers. For the German soldiers, the sight struck like a blow. They knew that shape, that walk, those deep-chested silhouettes that once belonged to their homeland. Rottweilers. For a long moment, no one spoke. Becker froze, his breath caught halfway between awe and shame. Mein Gott, someone muttered behind him. They're ours. The Americans called them by English names. Rex, Duke, but their lineage was unmistakable. German dogs wearing American insignia. The irony cut deep. The same breed once used to patrol concentration camps, now protecting captives from harm. A living symbol that the world had turned upside down. That night, the camp buzzed with uneasy conversation. Some POWs were angry. How could the Americans twist a proud German breed into a tool of their victory? Others saw something more unsettling. The Americans didn't treat the dogs with fear or brutality. They patted them, spoke softly, even shared bits of rations. These beasts were not symbols of domination but of control, of quiet strength. One guard scratched behind a Rottweiler's ear, and the animal leaned affectionately against his leg. Becker watched from a distance, his chest tightening. Even the dogs, he thought, are freer here than men were in Germany. In the weeks that followed, the dogs became a constant presence. Their footfalls marked time. Their silent patrols drew invisible lines between captivity and freedom. The Germans began to respect them, even envy them. And at night, when the wind carried faint barks across the prairie, men who once shouted "Heil Hitler" whispered to one another about the absurdity of it all, the Reich collapsing under bombs while its loyal hounds guarded fields of Texas cotton. By mid-August, more trains arrived, bringing new prisoners who asked the same questions, stared at the same animals, and felt the same sting of disbelief. Word spread through the camp that these dogs were fed steak scraps, brushed daily, and treated by veterinarians. Some Germans laughed bitterly. They care more for a dog than Berlin cared for its wounded. Others fell silent, knowing it was true. For the first time in years, many began to wonder whether strength was truly measured in cruelty, or in discipline, restraint, and mercy. When the bugle called lights out, Becker lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Outside, he could hear the faint jingle of a chain, the pad of paws on dry earth. The thought was unbearable and strangely comforting all at once, that even in defeat, something German had found a home in the land of its conquerors. He closed his eyes, the sound fading into the night. Somewhere beyond the fence, a Rottweiler paused, listening to the same wind that carried whispers from across the ocean. And for the first time, Becker wondered not how he had lost the war, but what kind of people he had lost it to. Morning came with a pale wash of Texas light, the kind that softened everything except the truth. Inside Camp Bowie, the prisoners stood in line for roll call, the air already warming, dust rising from the ground like faint smoke. Beyond the fence, they saw the same patrols as yesterday, American soldiers, tall and casual, with their rifles slung easy across their shoulders. But this morning, the eyes of the camp weren't on the guards. They were on the animals walking beside them, two immense Rottweilers, their coats gleaming black and copper under the sun, their movements silent and deliberate, like shadows given form. For the Germans, it was like staring into a reflection warped by defeat. The breed was unmistakably theirs, born in the hills of Rottweil, bred by butchers to drive cattle and guard gold. They had called the dogs Metzgerhund, butcher's dogs, symbols of German discipline and power. To see them now on American leashes, obedient to English commands, was a small humiliation wrapped in fur and muscle. "Even our dogs have changed sides," one prisoner murmured bitterly, his voice barely carrying over the morning wind. The guards called out friendly commands, "Heel, Duke," "Sit, Rex," as if speaking to old friends. The dogs obeyed with mechanical precision, their eyes fixed on the horizon. They did not growl, did not bare teeth, did not need to. Their calm was more unnerving than hostility. Becker watched them from his place in line, the collar of his tattered field jacket scratching at his neck. He had once trained dogs like those near Munich, for patrol duties along the Danube. His own had been fierce, loyal, unflinching. But these, These had an eerie patience to them, a quiet intelligence that seemed almost human. Later that day, Becker was assigned to a fence repair crew along the northern perimeter. The sun burned hard against the wire as they replaced loose posts and tightened strands with pliers. Across the divide, an American MP strolled by, a Rottweiler padding beside him. The man was humming, low and tuneless, while the dog's eyes followed Becker's every move. Not a snarl, not even a twitch of aggression, just the steady gaze of a creature utterly sure of its authority. It wasn't the threat of violence that held Becker frozen, it was the control. In Germany, control came from fear. Here, it came from discipline. As the MP approached, he gave a polite nod, tipping his cap. "Hot one today," he said, in slow English, as if to bridge the distance. Becker didn't reply. His English was patchy, but he noticed the man's hand resting lightly on the dog's back, not as command, but reassurance. The Rottweiler's ears flicked, its muscles relaxed. That small touch unsettled him more than a rifle pointed at his chest ever could. When the patrol passed, Becker's work partner, a farmer from Bavaria named Newman, exhaled sharply. "Do you see that?" he whispered. "They treat them like soldiers." Becker didn't answer. He watched the animal's silhouette vanish beyond the curve of the fence, its tail steady, head high. The Germans had made their dogs into weapons. The Americans had made theirs into guardians. Somehow, the difference felt moral. That night, rumors spread faster than the heat. Some said the Americans fed the dogs better than the prisoners. Others swore the animals had their own kennel barracks, with fans and fresh water. One guard supposedly brushed them daily. The stories grew like weeds, absurd yet believable, because everything in this strange captivity already defied expectation. "They've turned our pride into their peacekeepers," someone muttered during evening count. Laughter followed, uneasy and quiet. A few weeks later, during a work detail hauling lumber for new latrines, Becker saw one of the dogs up close. The MP handler, Corporal Sanders, his name tag read, was supervising the crew. The Rottweiler beside him lay in the shade, panting softly, its massive chest rising and falling with a slow rhythm. Becker couldn't help glancing toward it. The dog met his eyes and tilted its head, curious. For a fleeting second Becker felt something absurdly familiar, a memory of home, of his father's farm, of simpler creatures that guarded, not killed. The feeling passed quickly, replaced by a heaviness he couldn't name. When the shift ended, Becker lingered behind, pretending to tie his bootlace. Sanders noticed and said, in slow English, "You like him?" Becker hesitated, then nodded. The corporal smiled. "Rex, good boy." He patted the dog's neck and added, "German breed, huh? You folks made good dogs." The tone was friendly, almost teasing, but the words hit like a confession. Becker looked away. For years they'd been told Germany made the best of everything: cars, guns, soldiers, dogs. Now even that pride had been leashed by the enemy. As weeks turned into months, the dogs became symbols the men couldn't ignore. Every evening they watched patrols move like clockwork, human and animal in perfect sync, both confident, neither cruel. The fence, once a reminder of defeat, began to look like a line of contrast, one side born of control through fear, the other through respect. Even Newman, once defiant, admitted one night, "They win wars differently than we do. Maybe that's why they win." Still, the sight of those Rottweilers gnawed at the prisoner's pride. Some joked bitterly that the dogs would forget German words soon. Others dreamed that when they returned home, they would reclaim them, breed them back to loyalty. But deep down, many knew the truth. The dogs had adapted, just as men would have to. Becker often found himself studying the handlers more than the animals, trying to understand the strange calm that seemed to define these Americans. They didn't shout or threaten. They trusted obedience because they had earned it. It was a kind of power the Reich had never understood. One afternoon, a commotion broke the monotony. A young POW, barely 19, desperate, tried to slip under the fence during a delivery. The alarm sounded, and the Rottweiler on patrol lunged forward, its chains snapping taut. Becker froze, expecting the snarl, the attack. But it never came. The dog stopped just short of the boy, blocking his path. It didn't bite. It didn't bark. It simply stood there, chest heaving, eyes locked on the trembling prisoner until guards arrived. The control was surgical, almost compassionate. The Americans praised the dog with a single word: good. That night Becker couldn't sleep. He kept seeing that moment, the restraint, the silent authority, the lesson in it. The next morning, he wrote in his small camp-issued notebook, "Strength is not in violence. It is in what one chooses not to do." Over time, the Rottweilers became part of camp rhythm, the steady punctuation between mornings and nights, between old pride and new humility. The Germans began to sketch them, to name them in secret, as if understanding them meant understanding something about themselves. When mail arrived from home, letters filled with despair, bombings, and hunger, the dogs remained constant, quiet sentinels of a world that still made sense. One evening, as the sun sank low, Becker watched a handler toss a stick for his dog just beyond the wire. The animal fetched it eagerly, tail wagging, pure joy in motion. Becker smiled without meaning to. "They even let them play," Newman said softly. Becker nodded. "Yes," he replied, eyes fixed on the animal leaping through orange light, "and they never forget to come back." He didn't know why the words struck him so deeply. Perhaps it was the realization that even in captivity, there was still something noble about loyalty freely given. Perhaps it was envy. Whatever it was, when the bugle called for lights out, Becker's last thought was not of war or loss, but of that dog, half German, half American, patrolling the edge of his world. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet truth began to take shape, one that would haunt him long after the fences were gone. By late autumn, the air around Camp Bowie had cooled, and the mesquite trees cast long, crooked shadows across the parade ground. The rhythm of captivity had settled into something that felt dangerously close to normal. Men who had once marched in perfect columns across Europe now lined up for breakfast trays, carried lumber, or hoed cotton under the same sun as their captors. The Germans had stopped expecting cruelty. In its place, they found something stranger: routine kindness. It came in small forms: a guard offering a cigarette, a medic patching a blistered hand, a voice saying, "Take your time, soldier." That last word, soldier, was what caught them most off guard. They were still being called soldiers, not prisoners, as if their dignity had survived the surrender. For Becker, the transformation had been slow, almost invisible. The days blurred into each other, work details, roll calls, the same jokes whispered in the barracks at night. Yet somewhere between the clang of dinner trays and the low bark of dogs beyond the wire, something inside him began to thaw. He started speaking more English, asking the guards questions. The Americans answered easily, their tone casual, almost teasing. "We're just doing a job, same as you did," one said. "Difference is, ours pays better." Becker laughed, startled at how natural it felt. Laughter was a rare language between enemies. The Rottweilers, too, had changed in his eyes. What began as humiliation now stirred something closer to fascination. Each patrol passed with predictable grace, animal and handler in perfect harmony. The Germans had learned the dog's routines, their temperament. Becker knew one by its gait alone: a younger dog, broad-headed, with a small white patch on its chest. The handler called him Bruno. When the work crew was stationed near the motor depot, Becker often saw Bruno lying under the truck shade, his tongue lolling in the heat, eyes half closed. The MP, a stocky man from Kansas named Miller, would scratch behind the dog's ears and mutter, "Good boy, keeping watch." Becker admired that, how command and affection coexisted in a single gesture. One afternoon, Miller surprised him. As Becker stacked lumber, the MP approached, holding a tin bowl. "Water for the men," he said, setting it down near the crew. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "And for him too." Bruno padded forward, sniffing the rim before lapping up the water. Miller chuckled. "See? He's German, but he drinks Texan." Becker smiled faintly, unsure if it was a joke or an olive branch. In that moment, the enemy line blurred. The dog drank from the same bowl they did, and nobody stopped him. In the evenings, the camp softened. The guards shared cigarettes. The prisoners sang. From the guard tower, an MP might hum along quietly. The Rottweilers dozed near the gate, their chains slack, their loyalty unquestioned. It was a strange kind of peace, born not of surrender, but of understanding. Becker began writing letters home describing it. "They do not hate us," he wrote to his mother. "They treat even their dogs with fairness. I think this is their secret weapon, order without cruelty." He folded the letter carefully, unsure if censors would let it through. The camp chaplain, an old Methodist minister with tired eyes, visited the barracks each Sunday. He brought worn Bibles and a tone that never judged. Some Germans attended just to feel human again, to hear words not barked as orders. One morning, as Becker passed the small chapel tent, he saw Miller kneeling beside Bruno, bowing his head during the prayer. The sight unsettled him in a way he couldn't explain. Even the dogs, it seemed, were included in this quiet mercy. Winter brought rain and mud, but also warmth. Coffees shared at the workshop stove, blankets patched by local women. A few of the guards spoke German now, clumsy but sincere. "Guten Morgen, Becker," one said, grinning. The man pronounced it wrong, and Becker corrected him gently. They laughed together, both realizing how absurd this all was, teaching your jailer your mother tongue. Still, pride dies hard. Not every man accepted the kindness. Newman, Becker's old workmate, muttered that it was all propaganda, that the Americans were fattening them for use. "They want to make us soft," he said one night, staring at the ceiling. "And they're winning." Becker didn't answer. Perhaps softness was what the world needed now. The Reich had taught hardness well enough. On Christmas Eve, the Americans set up a small tree near the mess hall. They invited the POW choir to sing. Snowflakes fell softly, rare for Texas, dusting the barbed wire in white. The guards stood beside the prisoners, hats in hand, while the Rottweilers watched from a few yards away, their breath misting in the cold. When the Germans sang, still knacked, voices low and trembling, even the dogs seemed to quiet. Becker's throat tightened as he sang, his voice merging with those of men who, months ago, would have shot across a field at these same soldiers. The final note faded into the night, and for one fragile instant, the war felt impossibly far away. Afterward, Miller approached Becker, carrying a small wrapped parcel. Inside was a piece of chocolate, stamped with an American eagle. "From the Red Cross," Miller said. Becker nodded, whispering, "Danke?" Miller shrugged. "Merry Christmas, pal." Behind him, Bruno wagged his tail once, as if in approval. That night Becker couldn't sleep. He stared at the rafters, listening to the soft snore of exhausted men, the rustle of rain on tin. Beyond the fence, a Rottweiler barked once, sharp and brief, before silence reclaimed the camp. Becker thought of home, of Munich's bombed streets, of the broken faces he'd left behind. He realized, with a pang that felt like guilt, that he was safer here, in the land of his enemies, than his family was under his own flag. The thought haunted him. In January, the new year arrived quietly. News of the war filtered in through newspapers and rumor, the Allies crossing the Rhine, the Soviets advancing on Berlin. The prisoners grew restless. Yet life inside the wire went on with the same strange civility. The dogs aged, handlers rotated out, but the rhythm never broke. Becker noticed how Miller spoke to Bruno now, softer than before, as if to a friend rather than a tool. One afternoon, Miller said to him, "You know, when this is over, I'm taking him home. He's earned it." Becker smiled faintly. "So have you," he said. By March, the first whispers of repatriation reached the camp. The men buzzed with anticipation and dread. They longed for home, yet feared what they would find there. Becker wondered what would remain of Germany, and what would remain of them. One evening, he walked near the fence and saw Miller kneeling beside Bruno, brushing his fur. He called softly through the wire, "Take care of him." Miller looked up, surprised. "Don't worry, pal," he said, "he's family." For a long moment they stared at each other, two soldiers from opposite worlds, bound by a dog that belonged to both. In the fading light, Becker realized that captivity had done something no battle could. It had made him see humanity on the other side. That night, when the bugle called lights out, he lay awake listening to the rhythmic pacing of paws beyond the fence. Each step sounded like a heartbeat, steady and alive, bridging the space between enemy and friend. And somewhere deep inside him, Becker understood that the war had already begun to end, not in Berlin or London, but here in a quiet camp in Texas, where mercy had learned to wear a uniform. By the spring of 1945, the war that had swallowed continents was finally cracking apart. In the newspapers that filtered through the camp, the Germans read names that once commanded fear: Rhineland, Nuremberg, Berlin, now written beside words like fallen and surrendered. The camp loudspeaker delivered updates in flat English tones, but every man understood the message. The Reich was dying. Becker stood in the sunlight outside the barracks, watching the flagpole where the stars and stripes rippled in the wind. Beyond the wire, Bruno and his handler paced their usual path, the rhythm of captivity still unbroken. Yet something in the air had changed. The guards spoke more softly. The dogs seemed calmer. Freedom, Becker realized, was no longer a rumor. It was approaching like a slow train in the distance. Rumor said they would soon be sent home. Some men cheered quietly. Others dreaded what home had become. They imagined cities flattened, families scattered, the homeland nothing but smoke and rubble. In the evenings, men gathered by the fence and watched the sunset melt into gold and red. "We will go back to nothing," Newman said one night, his voice heavy. Becker shook his head. "Not to nothing," he replied. "To something different." It sounded naive even to him, but he wanted to believe it. Perhaps that belief was all they had left. As the days lengthened, the camp loosened. Restrictions eased. The prisoners walked more freely within the wire. Guards greeted them by name. Work details slowed and laughter crept back into the air. One afternoon, Becker helped Miller unload supplies from a truck. Bruno, now older and grayer around the muzzle, trotted beside them. "He's going home too," Miller said, rubbing the dog's flank. "No more war for him." Becker smiled faintly. "He has served both sides," he said. "Maybe that makes him wiser than us." Miller chuckled. "Yeah. He never cared who won, just who was kind." The remark lingered with Becker for days. He had lived his life believing obedience was virtue, loyalty was strength. Yet here, in a camp built by enemies, it was compassion that commanded respect. Even the dogs knew it. They enforced the rules with calm certainty, never cruelty. They reminded him of what discipline could be when untainted by ideology, firm, fair, and free of hate. Watching them patrol, Becker thought of how far he had come from the man who first stepped off the train into Texas dust, angry and proud. That man had vanished somewhere between the fences and the sunsets. Then, in early May, the announcement came. Germany had surrendered. The war was over. The camp fell into silence when the loudspeaker delivered the words. No one shouted or cursed. It was as if the air had been punched from their lungs. Becker sat on the barracks step, staring at the dirt. Around him, men wept quietly. Some prayed. Others just stared, hollow-eyed, into the distance. Miller approached later with coffee, setting the mug down beside him. "Guess that's that," he said softly. Becker nodded. "So it ends." Miller looked at him for a long moment, then said, "Nah. Now it starts." In the days that followed, the Germans helped dismantle parts of their own captivity. They took down fences, cleaned barracks, packed supplies. For the first time, Becker walked beyond the wire without a guard beside him. The open air felt both exhilarating and terrifying. He realized how used he had become to boundaries, how safety had begun to resemble confinement. Freedom, he thought, demanded a kind of courage he hadn't needed in chains. One morning, as the last transport trucks prepared for departure, Becker found Miller and Bruno at the gate. The dog sat calmly beside his handler, tail brushing the dirt. Miller extended his hand. "Safe trip, Becker," he said. Becker hesitated, then shook it firmly. "Thank you for everything," he said, struggling for the right words. "For how you treated us. For how you treated him." He nodded toward the dog. Miller smiled faintly. "He's a good judge of character. He liked you fellas." Becker's eyes lingered on Bruno. "In Germany they taught us to make him fierce," he said quietly. "Here, you taught him to be fair." Miller looked at the dog and shrugged. "Same training, different heart." The whistle blew. Becker stepped onto the truck bed, turning for one last look. Bruno stood watching him, head slightly tilted, as if memorizing the shape of his departure. For a heartbeat, man and dog regarded each other across the space that had once divided captor and captive. Then the truck jolted forward, and the camp began to shrink behind him. Rows of neat barracks, the guard towers, the rippling flag. In the distance, the Rottweiler turned and trotted after his handler, disappearing into sunlight. The journey home was long and uncertain. Through Louisiana, the Carolinas, across the Atlantic to Le Havre, Becker saw wars ruin everywhere, ports shattered, cities ghosted by fire. Yet something inside him remained still. At night, when the ship's engines hummed, he could almost hear the rhythm of POWs on Texas earth, steady and patient. It reminded him of a promise unspoken, a kind of mercy that did not depend on nation or uniform. Months later, back in Munich, Becker found his home a skeleton of what it had been. The streets were gray with dust, the windows gaping. His mother's letter awaited him at a neighbor's house, smudged, trembling handwriting thanking God he lived. He walked the empty lanes, feeling both foreign and familiar. Everywhere he looked, he saw ghosts of orders obeyed too well. He thought of the Americans, of Miller's easy kindness, of the way they said "soldier" without contempt. Most of all, he thought of the dogs, their silent discipline, their refusal to hate. One evening, while passing a ruined butcher's shop, he stopped at the sound of soft barking. A Rottweiler pup, thin and trembling, was tied near the door. Becker crouched, untied it, and lifted the small body into his arms. The dog licked his wrist once, trusting instantly. Becker smiled, the first real smile in months. "You'll do better," he whispered in German. "We both will." In time, the little dog became his companion. Becker trained it as he had in the old days, but differently now. No harsh words, no forced submission. Only patience, repetition, quiet authority. Neighbors laughed, saying he spoiled the animal. He didn't care. When it followed him through the streets, people smiled at the sight. A former soldier and a once feared breed walking side by side through the rubble of a fallen empire, building something gentler from the ruins. Years later, in interviews with historians, Becker would describe Camp Bowie as the strangest kind of victory. He said the Americans had conquered him not with force, but with decency. "They treated us like men," he said. "And in doing so, they reminded us how to be human again." Sometimes, at night, he dreamed of Texas, the dust, the wire, the barking in the dark. He'd wake with tears in his eyes, unsure if they were for what he'd lost or what he'd found. Because in that camp, far from home, he had learned the most unexpected truth of all, that mercy, once given freely, never really ends. It travels, like a well-trained dog, across borders and years, guarding what is left of the human soul.